So without further ado, welcome to the 7th Annual Diaspora Voices Conference at the University of Toronto. Thank you.
Film songs, therefore, act as a powerful conduit for Indo-Caribbean contribution to what I am theorizing in my larger dissertation project as a continuum of remix in Trinidad. I define remix as a process of constant fusion and confusion of fragmented texts that, when assembled and reassembled, create new cultural meanings that champion concepts of hybridity and plurality. Indeed, remix operates as a useful tool and practice of cultural hybridity, the theoretical framework my research closely engages, that destabilizes originality, purity, and authenticity, advancing the creolization argument so often used to examine Caribbean culture, while attempting to make sense of culture and identity as multi-layered and multi-referential. As Chutney Soca begins to align itself along a close carnival orbit, thereby becoming a seasonal music, the film song begins to offshoot in multiple directions. It becomes off-season repertoire, that is, cover versions recorded in and for times that are outside of Trinidad Carnival. A seasonal repertoire in the form of a colloquial dubbed music called Bollyni, which is the portmanteau terms of Bollywood and chutney. So Bolly from Bollywood and ni from chutney. And as Chutney Soca remixes of film songs by mostly Indo-Caribbean DJs, particularly in the Indo-Caribbean diaspora.
But she made many references to a son she had sent abroad to educate himself. And this generally served as an explanation. The lore surrounding this son was already in existence while I was growing up. However, no one has seen this supposed son of hers, or can even confirm that he exists outside of her own head. Nevertheless, it could not be disputed that this was her house, regardless of the means by which she had come into it. The house is really quite massive. Nowadays, these houses are not as rare as they once were, but even today, it remains something of a marvel. Miss Ernestine had not been living in this house while I was growing up. At that time, the lore regarding her son was concerned with other matters. Though in those days she was living in the same type of wooden house as the rest of us, there were certain possessions she had, the existence of which she was circumspect about making clear to us, that were extraordinary.
How is Champeta culture being used as a tool by the elites to attract tourists to the city? And what are the effects of the elites' appropriation of Champeta culture on Afro-Colombian communities in Cartagena? My research was conducted through a series of interviews with residents of the city and artists involved in the Champeta music scene. The focus of my project, for the most part, was centered around a neighborhood called San Francisco, or San Pacho as it's known to its residents. This neighborhood carries within it kind of a negative reputation within Cartagena. It's known to be very dangerous. It's also very heavily involved in the Champeta scene. So the infamous corner of El Huillo, as it's known, is where all of the people come to gather and listen to the picos, which is the big sound system in the neighborhood.
Today at the conference, I spoke on exporting reggae music, and I kind of compared the movements, the reggae revival, which is a current generation of youth creating music, and I compared that with reggae artists who haven't seen great successes abroad, and looked at why that is, what happens to identity, like when music leaves the region. Artists associated with slackness have not shied away from controversial topics, no matter the consequences. And it is this process of putting controversial topics and sexually explicit themes alongside reggae and Rastafari that have been criticized by non-Jamaican listeners. So while there is no doubt that positive messages encouraging social change are found within the revivalist music, this does not mean that they don't include sexually explicit themes that are considered to be slack. So overt sexuality and condemnatory attitudes women are themes that exist, just portrayed in a different light. So for instance, Protégé's Love Gone Cold provides commentary on a former lover, where he states, "Girl not show man no decency. She could've be the queen if she played the card right, but she would've rather be the ace." So here the woman is presented as unruly, the relationship like into a game, and unable to work as the woman wanted to be number one. Janine's Avocado is a suggestive song where her humble lion brings her the good love.
So I began my research by trying to understand what identity truly meant in terms of its own definition. Taking into consideration this definition for identity, which is provided by the Merriam-Webster, I realized that identity in relation to these frameworks will be defined through truths that these frameworks attempt to highlight, and it is through these truths that this idea of identity can be acknowledged. So in my essay, I looked at 5 different frameworks to support my claim. However, there were 4 that helped me structure my claim and provided context as well as content to help me answer this question. So the first image I have here is by a Caribbean artist, Peter Dean, and it's called Escaping Pineapple. So this is one of the frameworks that helped me answer this question. The image deals with a pineapple, which is a fruit, that was commodified and shipped abroad during the Columbian period in Caribbean history. So according to Monzant, which was one of the scholars I used to provide context on this picture, pineapples were actually a part of indigenous crops that were commodified and shipped abroad and made as export materials that helped the Spanish economies boom during the early periods of the Caribbean history. Under those circumstances, it's understood that colonization is responsible for the migration of the pineapple in America, which you see today. So this image is a metaphor, I believe, for escapism and the exploitation that the region has experienced as a product of colonization. I saw migration and escapism as an underlying theme of this framework in relation to the identity of the Caribbean. I understood that this idea of the escaping pineapple is key because the culture, the people, and even the food in the region, whether indigenous or foreign, have come to this region through some sort of voyage. And ultimately, in relation to identity, migration is a factor that we need to consider as it's deeply embedded in the context of the Caribbean, but it's important to make note of when answering this question of identity.